Go for it.
Be interested, yeah, to hear people's views on the introduction of the incentives and what impact they think that's going to have on apprenticeship starts, either directly because of the incentives for apprenticeships and the other kickstart incentives around work placements and so on. And also there is an incentive for non-apprenticeship route, so where they take on a young person and they'll pay up to 25 hours, I think it is, of their salary for up to the first 6 months. So is that going to have an adverse impact because that incentive might be greater for an employer than for the apprenticeship start? So yeah, just interested to hear people's views and what's working or not working for them. It's only the first week, so and just what their sort of strategies are for the incentives.
Yeah, great. Deborah, have you had any conversations at your space or your new place around any of that yet?
No, because obviously we haven't officially moved over yet. I suppose from my experience, though, in the past, I haven't got my camera on. That's because the camera's not very good on this machine. But if you had, you'd realise that, I'm no spring chicken. So I've been on this roundabout before, and what goes around comes around, doesn't it? I suppose for me, it's going to be that same balance that I'm all for getting youngsters into apprenticeships. It's a passion of mine. It's going to be that balance of taking the learners on that are perhaps being recruited. But I sometimes find with the programs like this is that there's a sort of rush to recruit and get people on, that maybe the recruitment isn't as rigorous as it normally would be. Those learners then are not as suitable as we initially thought. And we end up with a lot of dropouts, which actually then impacts some of our success rates. I know sounds like I'm being a bit negative, and I'm not, because I'm always supportive of anything that gets youngsters into training and education. But I don't know if you agree, I think one of the challenges for the training providers is going to be that taking these learners on and making sure they stay on programme because of those incentives. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I agree. I think the rationale for why the employer is taking that young person on has to be right. And you're right. That's the role of the provider in terms of making sure that the employer is fully aware and fully committed to that apprenticeship, and that it does form part of their strategy. Now, we're in a fairly unique situation with COVID-19 in that there are going to be lots and lots of organisations that are going to be adversely affected. And actually, coming out of lockdown, coming out of the furlough scheme, potentially employers are going to be looking at how they can reduce their wage bill. So that may mean some redundancies, and it may mean that they have a recruitment strategy in terms of bringing on apprentices in place of, or in addition, they may see growth opportunities and therefore want to do that. But it's the role of the provider to understand what the rationale is behind that, and that's the right rationale, and that makes sense, not just for that employer and not just for that apprentice, but overall. And that's why I think it's important that providers aren't just going out and saying, take on an apprentice and you're going to get X.
You're seeing a lot of that advertising at the moment, aren't you? LinkedIn's full of it. Yeah.
And we've deliberately not done it. The information's out there anyway, but that shouldn't be what you're marketing.
No, I think that's sound.
Yes, the incentives are great, and I think the government's doing everything it can to support, and that's why it's called Kickstart, but kickstarting the economy and trying to battle the anticipated peak in unemployment, and in particular for young people. So I think that's great, but I think that we as providers have got a responsibility to make sure it's done in the right way. And as I said, just flogging the fact that there are incentives out there to take on apprenticeship staff isn't necessarily the right starting point. But that's just my opinion.
Sorry, no, I think what's quite interesting is the link I put for the C&G funding webinar. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to watch it, but there was some, and as part of that, there was some really good slides, and that's one of the reasons that I put it into the group, around the things that you needed to have in place for the ESFA audits, and almost like a checklist. And I think, picking up on what you said, Paul, and what Deborah was saying, I think that checklist is going to be so essential, because it is all about that starting points, and has it been assessed properly for the role, and the amount of time that somebody's going to be on program, and if they work less than 30 hours, that the program would be extended by the right amount of time, and that all those calculations have been taken into account. And I think any provider who's not thinking about those kind of questions and having that built into their contracting paperwork, and some of the other ESFA guidance about having 2 separate documents as part of the contracting, and I think if providers ignore that and just sign people up, then yes, absolutely, it's going to be mayhem. But I think the other thing as well is that it's a bit early to say about starts, because we're still seeing and really the redundancies are starting to peak, and I think, you know, because the furlough scheme is just ending, I think possibly October is going to be one of those months where they're going to sort the wheat from the chaff, and then maybe September, that will be when we can start to then see the new shoots of growth, and possibly people then being taken properly onto apprenticeships and moving forward. And it's also quite interesting as well, the sort of the get around that's being talked about for the business admin that's not there. And the fact that, you know, have a look at putting onto a customer service, and then maybe tapping into the AEB funding to put some business admin units alongside that, to allow people to still do apprenticeships. But the danger is that add-on stuff has to be done in addition to the 20% off the job. So it's like an extra program that they're doing. So I think it's very interesting times on all sorts of fronts, really.
And when we wrote customer service too, we wrote it with a real passion for the customer. You know, we had some great people in the room. We had the Institute of Customer Service, we had Boots, we had, you know, British Gas, we had the police, we had Superdrug, we had some rewarding bodies that were really passionate about this. So the curriculum for 2 and 3 is written in a way to really spark that excitement and energy around working with customers. So now you're starting to shoehorn it into something else. I just wonder what that's going to take away. I understand why people are doing it, absolutely, because of the decision that's been made, but it's just an interesting approach.
I've got mixed feelings about that, to be honest, Erica, because it's, what's your concept of a customer?
Yeah, and we do talk about internal, external,
I'm you know, one of the things that I talk about quite a lot is my personal opinion in essential things that people should have is customer service, maths, English, and ability to use technology effectively. And those are just basics, if you like. Those are your essential skills. And then whatever you do career-wise, it should be on top of that. And I think everybody should have good customer service skills.
Oh, yeah, I do agree with you, yeah.
So I don't see that as quite as much of a problem, because one of the things that you can have in certain environments, like business admin as well, is they can be so blinkered and just think about their little job and and they don't think about the wider impact. So
yeah, that's a good point. It's a really good point.
Just back to another example of I think it's another example of funding driving behaviour. And again, we're in danger of the incentives doing the same. So it's really clear, and this is what's interesting for me. So in the new world of apprenticeships, it was all about the employer having more say and more input in terms of apprenticeships and how they're delivered. And if we're saying that there's clearly a demand from employers for, say, a replacement for business admin, then why isn't it being developed? And why is it? Sorry?
It is now, I think.
No, I think they keep kicking it back.
Oh, are they?
The new announcement, Christine, if we're talking about the same thing, is a public sector standard at level 2.
Oh, okay.
And I think there's criticism around that. because then if you're not a public sector organisation, you won't be able to access it, or the question is being asked if you're not a public sector organisation. So I think there's some ambiguity around that new standard. But if there, come back to my point, if there is a clear demand from industry for a business admin level 2 replacement, then I don't see what the issue is. And there seems to be clearly a reluctance. Now, we know what the high volume of business admin level 2 was in the past. We know what percentage of starts, what percentage of funding that took up. So it would be interesting for the ESFA to be really clear in terms of what its preference is in terms of a business admin level 2 replacement or not. And I think it needs to be really clear on that, because you're right, if you've got trailblazer groups who are developing this standard and it's being kicked back every time, why is it? And is it, are they flogging a dead horse here?
I mean, does it sit in this space that's a little bit like T levels and stuff like that? And is it almost being seen that level 2 is only really for young people and is incorporated within that sort of development that is being done through things like maybe BTECs and stuff like that, and that when it comes to the apprenticeship, that really it should only be level 3 and above, because they should have already done all the training before they get to that point? I know it's all rubbish, and that some of the, the customer service level 2 and some of the other level 2s, they've been out quite a long time.
We were the first ones to go through, to get the assessment plan published.
And so the focus on T levels wasn't so great then, was it? And I do wonder whether some of the noises that have been made in the sector about, you stopping the opportunity for young people to go into a level 2 apprenticeship, and are you trying to channel people down into this like T level, that kind of thing? It does make you wonder, because it is a very important apprenticeship.
Absolutely.
Deborah, you were going to, sorry.
I'll just finish off. Sorry, Deborah.
Yeah, sure.
That's why the ESFA need to be clear in terms of what their intentions are. So you're right, Christine. If the strategy over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years is to phase out apprenticeship funding at level 2, for example, so it's only level 3 and above, and this is part of their strategy, then just come out and say that. I'm not suggesting that is, and that's not my interpretation, but if that is the case, then do that. And then my final point is about funding driving behaviour. The example you gave, Christian, is a really good example of that. Providers are very good at finding ways of getting to the end result by using the funding streams available. And then what the ESFA then are finding that they will have to do is to closely monitor that, and if necessary, police it. And that just distracts us all away from what we really need to do, which is finding a solution for business admin level 2 replacement. So anyway, but that's
Deborah, you were going to come in with a couple of points there.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, the first was about the customer service and it being the level 2, because obviously a lot of these new apprentices will be level 2, and sort of trying to put it into admin. The only issue that I would see as somebody who does EPAs, not customer service, but other ones, is it's going to be that endpoint assessment, because I don't know a lot about the customer service, but I do understand there's a practical observation as part of the endpoint assessment. And if they're not actually dealing with sufficient depth of customer complaints and having to be face to face or over the phone with customers, they're not going to get that observation, are they? I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but that would be, and I think it is, that's one of the things I think providers sometimes do, and that's another danger, is you think, well, we've got a learner, what can we put them on? And then you get to the end and realise you can't do customer service because they're not really, you're not going to get through the observation because they haven't got the breadth. Because even level 2's got a fair amount of breadth, hasn't it, from what I have seen? So I would be very nervous about putting people onto level 2 customer service unless they're in a customer service role. And I speak as somebody who has a customer service background, so you've got
to make sure they can cover the full range of knowledge, skills and behaviours, don't you? And I think this is where the screening is going to be so important, to make sure, going back to what you were saying, Deborah, that they're not just putting people on apprenticeships just to get the start, that apprenticeship is right for the learner. because otherwise it will all go pear-shaped. Success rates will be impacted, and there'll be massive clawback as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I think I agree about business admin level 2. I mean, I don't know how many things I've signed and supported to get a business admin 2 standard, because that 3 is hard. I mean, I do EPA that one. It is difficult, especially if they've just come out of school. They're not likely to be coaching people, reviewing people. I mean, that office junior type role is still still there, and I think it's a great shame, because just because somebody could have left school with A levels, but it doesn't mean they're going to be competent in that role. I mean, there's an AAT level 2. Nobody's ever sort of questioned whether that shouldn't be there. So I still don't know why they won't do an admin 2, whether it's because it was so popular and there were so many starts, and they decided that they wanted to, I don't know, put people into other apprenticeships. I don't know. As for the T levels, I remember the specialist diplomas.
Yes.
That they were going to do, and it was all, they were going with buzzing learners all the way over the city, remember? And it fell down because you couldn't get the work experience. And I have that same concern over the T levels. I don't see how people are going to go in those T levels are going to get that work experience for that amount of learners. I sound like I'm being really negative today.
But I think you're
very positive.
It's not no, you're not putting it over in a negative way.
No, absolutely. And I think your points are valid. So if you look at the start figures over the last year, I think the top 3 are ODM, team leader, and customer service. And we always knew customer service 2 was going to be super, super popular anyway. But it would be interesting to, and I don't know if this research would ever come out, it probably wouldn't, how many of those are customer service for customer service, and how many of those are customer service for business admin? Do you know what I mean? It's it'd be interesting to understand what that would look like, really. So
yeah, because one of the models where I used to work, one of the models used to be with the hairdressers and barbers. They used to do level 2 hairdressing, but then they couldn't go straight on to level 3 because they had to build a column. So then they'd do either barbering or customer service at level 2, and then they'd possibly move on to level 3, or they might then do the other one that they haven't already done, just to build up their skills and give them the time to get ready for level 3. And then they would do the level 3 hairdressing, and then they'd do level 3 customer service as well, and then they might move on to management.
wow, that's a lot, isn't it?
Mm.
And going back to the point around incentives as well, and Paul, I absolutely subscribe to everything you were saying around right learner, right time, right program, etc. But if you think about all of those, providers that don't have the integrity, Paul, that you've been talking about, and Deborah, you've been talking about, as providers who are excuse my French, on their ass because of COVID financially, they're not going to be thinking about completion payments in a year, 2 years time. They're going to be thinking about get people on program, and if I can dangle the carrot to employers that they get this extra $2,000 on top of the grand that they already had, and we're all under stress and we're struggling to pay the mortgage, you can see the temptation there, because it's always been there anyway, because funding drives behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. I am going to need to go shortly, guys. Sorry, something urgent came up, but I totally agree, Erica. And this is the quandary that we're in. Absolutely, our sector, like most other sectors, have been adversely affected by COVID-19, and this is a real lifeline, and should be seen as a real lifeline in terms of the incentives and trying to reignite apprenticeship starts and the wider employment market, and help mainly employers, but also their current and future employees and their businesses, and therefore providers as well. But it has to be done in a measured way and in the right way. And if we do have providers going out and just marketing the fact that, look, just take this person on, this is the incentive, etc. And unfortunately, there will be some providers that will do that. Absolutely. I'd like to think that the majority won't. And coming back to Christine's point, if we've got some way of ensuring that a process is followed correctly and it justifies that start and that incentive, and it's not just that incentive is based on a start and a period of time, and then after 6 months it's paid, when we know that as a bare minimum the apprenticeship program is at least 12 months, so it's going to be double that, but in the majority of cases far longer. it may well be a short-term view. And unfortunately, we're only talking about providers here. There are also going to be employers who are going to take advantage of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And we'll see it as a short-term fix. You know, and we could well have, and I hope we don't, but we could well have a situation in 6 months' time with a large number of apprentices being left high and dry because they were taken on, the incentives were taken, and then they've been made redundant.
Yeah, that would be a crying shame. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's great that the incentives are there, because it's the government's way of showing that they still support the apprenticeship brand, and that they are behind apprenticeships and the standards and all the rest of it. And I think that is really positive, because it is so important for just generally growing the capacity within the whole country and the skills and everything that are needed. But yeah, I think it's I do have reservations on that 6-month thing, because the apprenticeship period is a minimum of 12 months.
Yeah, and again, I applaud the incentives as well. I think it's a really positive step. I think we have a collective responsibility again as a sector to ensure, though, that those incentives are used in the right way, and that those individuals who are taken on as apprentices are in genuine apprenticeship vacancies and opportunities, and that employer has a longer term goal for those individuals and for those apprentices. And dare I say it, that the incentive was not the main driver for that person being taken on, or that vacancy being created, or for them being put on an apprenticeship.
Paul, before you scoot off, have you seen or heard from many employers who have started coming and asking around this? Have you seen an uplift at this point at all?
So I mentioned last time, in terms of the Sustain programme that I'm on, we had our second yesterday. So talking with lots of employers from lots of different sectors. And what's really interesting for me is the amount of employers that are aware, so are already aware of.
Okay.
And in fact, a number of employers saying that, you know, it's now part of their strategy to look at apprenticeships. So again, what I'm hearing is it's not the main driver, it's not the reason why they're doing it, but absolutely, you know, again, where they can and if they can, they want to be able to help, in particular, young people. But equally, that apprenticeships is part of their recruitment strategy going forward. Because let's face it, from a business perspective, it is and can be a cost-effective way of create, you know, a solution for their staffing resource going forward. So what's interesting for me is that employers are already aware. Now, whether that's because they've seen, you know, providers advertising that on LinkedIn, or whether it's because the government, whether it's from the summer statement itself, because it was, you know, high profile, etc. I'm not sure. But what is clear for me is that employers are already aware. So absolutely, you know, if the incentives, as I said, are having a positive impact on apprenticeship starts, fantastic. Let's just make sure that they're the right apprenticeship starts and for the right reasons.
Yeah, agreed.
But I am going to have to go, guys. So,
okay, thank you. Thanks, Paul. I hope everything's okay.
Yeah, thanks very much.
All right, see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting rest of the year. It's been an interesting year anyway, hasn't it? But I think it's going to be, especially for this sector, it's going to be an interesting rest of the year.
Definitely, on so many levels, really. And you know, there's still so much uncertainty as well, because they're still talking about this second spike, aren't they? And they're talking about the fact that, you know, as we head into sort of the towards the autumn and winter months, that how much more vulnerable things are going to be now. And so it's quite interesting what you're saying about the people who have like abandoned trying to do remote delivery, because if it does come that we have to be in serious lockdown again, then they're back to square one. Whereas if they kept that as part of their sort of blended approach to delivery, then it can almost be like business as normal. And I think the other interesting fact is, as well, is if this comes about where they're saying, God help us, anyone over 50 isn't allowed to work. you know, then what a business is going to do then? Because Steve was saying there was something on the radio the other day, and that is something that's been a serious consideration. And there's been an outcry because the workforce of people that are over 50 is huge. And
was
so,
that the shielding thing? Was it if you're over 50 you
yeah.
need to shield? Yeah. I heard something about that.
So if people can't work, if you're shielding, you're effectively on sick. Because
Unless you can work from home. Yeah.
because I was told to shield in like the first phase, and I was told that meant that I had to inform my employer that I couldn't work, that I had to go on sick, and I should have been entitled to sickness benefit, but of course I wasn't because I'm self-employed. So I think there's so many unknown things that are all going to be impacting on this space.
How interesting. Okay, well, I think we've come to kind of a natural pause there, haven't we, or a natural finish. Deborah, you got any kind of final reflections on that conversation?
No, I suppose the other thing to add in the mix is that, I mean, most of my area is sort of the business side, is of course we've got new assessment plans coming in for the new learners, the team in level 3, and I've just had through the latest version of the draft for the level 5. There's going to be some differences. I think there's going to be a lot for providers to do over the next couple of months. But some of it's exciting, isn't it?
Well, there's one constant, which is change, right?
And I think as a sector, that's what, you know, we are quite good at adapting to that. And I think any providers that are sort of like keeping afloat at the moment with the things that have been thrown at them, that's going to make them strong for the next phase. Yeah. Because, you know, with all these aggregated grades and having to come to terms with still seeing learners and all the funding issues, and there's been an awful lot for providers to deal with.
Which I think coming together as a sector is so important, especially times like this, isn't it? Yeah.
Definitely.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, both. And retrospective, thank you for Paul for joining as well. I know Paul's looking to share some of his learns out of he's been doing this program. He mentioned it earlier. This is how he knows this Ian that you mentioned in the chat as well. That's I think it's like a business acceleration type program, but Paul's really happy to come in and share some of the principles and the learning off of that, perhaps in 2 weeks' time. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting as well. So I think that's what the next couple of weeks potentially will cover, unless anybody's got kind of thoughts that they want to bring in for something different, really.
No, I've also signed up for, I don't know whether it's going all around the country, but Greater Manchester have got an enterprise for anybody enterprise initiative, 6-month business support through People Plus for anyone who's been self-employed for less than 5 years and has been impacted by COVID. So if there's anything that sort of comes out from that
that'd be great.
Sharing, then I'll share that as well.
Yeah, that'd be. What is that, like a program supporting you through running your business and things like that? Is it?
Yeah. So I've got a business advisor or a business coach or mentor or whatever you want to call him, and I've been given as part of the program there's certain training courses that I can access, and also there's a health platform where I've got 24/7 access to health professionals, and all sorts of guidance on things like that, like mindfulness and mental well-being and healthy eating. So there's all that sort of stuff there that you can access as well. So yeah, it's early days yet, but I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Right.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, nice to see you, Deborah. Yeah, thanks. We're here every other week. Sometimes we have lots of people, sometimes it's just a few of us, so we chew the fat over certain things and always post the recording and the link as well. So yeah, it'd be good to see you again at some point.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Have a great week, Erica.
And you. Bye. Bye. Bye.